Hi, this is John Rosenhead, a Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post for Pesach is going to discuss the psychological experience at the time of Kriat. We read on the last day of Pesach, on this Shabbos, Shvi Shel Pesach, we read about the event of Kriat. And it's interesting the way the Pesukim describe the situation. So obviously the Bnei Yisrael were in a dire situation. Seemingly there was no escape. There was the Yam Suf, there was the sea in front of them, there was the quickly approaching army that was marching, the Egyptian army that was marching after them to come and kill them. There was no escape. And the Bnei Yisrael, as the Pesukim describe, went into panic mode. They cried out in sheer fear and terror. As the Pesukim describe, they cried out in panic to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Moshe Rabbeinu. And this was, if we understand it from a psychological explanation, was entering into the fight or flight mode. There is an understanding that when you are faced with dangerous situations, life or death situations, the body is made in a way that it activates this fight or flight mode, that it goes into a survival mode. And the Bnei Yisrael shouting out, crying out, at this point could be understood as being a fight or flight response. Can they fight against the Egyptian army? Can they flee into the sea? This was their moment this was their automatic response. This fight or flight of crying out, of this survival mode that was being activated. They needed to do something. This need for action to survive. This seemingly this choice of fight or flight that the person has. This is the crying out as the pasuk describes. The Bnei Yisrael's response at this moment was a fight or flight mode. But as the Mefarshim explain, and as we understand at this point, they didn't see the possibility of fleeing. The Yam Suf wasn't obvious that the sea was going to split. Seemingly there was no escape into the sea. And as Ibn Ezra explains, at least one of the explanations is that the Bnei Yisrael didn't see fighting against the Egyptian army as being a possibility either. So this fight or flight mode was activated when you're in a life or death situation. These are the options, and this is the body automatically goes into this response of can you fight, can you flee? But when neither of these options are viable, then there's this explanation in the psychological literature that there's a fight or flight which moves into the freeze mode. When neither of these options are viable, fighting or fleeing, the survival mode that is left in a way is freeze. It's simply to stay in. It's a panic response where you simply freeze. You can't do anything. And if we look at the Pesukim, this seems to be the response. Seems to be that the Bnei Yisrael went from fight or flight because they were stuck and there was no other option. Went into a freeze mode. The pasuk says "V'atem tacharishun," which, on one level, on a face value understanding, we could perhaps say is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, is that you should be okay. You should be calm. Everything's okay. You will be silent. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will fight for you. There's no need to shout out and cry out in panic. Everything will be okay. The fight or flight can be regulated, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will fight for you. You can be calm. You can be silent. But I think that this is difficult to understand in this way. The fight or flight mode that the Bnei Yisrael were in, this sheer panic that you can imagine, the Yam Suf in front of them, the Egyptian army behind them, seems to be a little bit inappropriate to suggest that the Bnei Yisrael can just be quiet and silent, everything will be okay. I think that the Atem Tacharishun can be understood to be the freeze mode of this survival mode. It went into this state where no option was available, fighting or fleeing, and there was this silence, it was this freeze response, where they could not do anything. As Sfas Emes explains, shouting out is a normal, natural response. It's the normal fight or flight response. When you're in a situation of terror, of panic, of danger, it's normal to respond. But the Sfas Emes explains that instead, that what happens, the Bnei Yisrael went from this natural fight or flight shouting response. The Sfas Emes explains that they went into this V'atem tacharishun, this silence, is that sometimes there is this internal voice, this internal fear, this panic of wanting to be, that is trying to be expressed, that wants to be expressed, that wants to cry out, but can't. When you go into this freeze mode, there is no way of being able to express this silent panic, this silent fear that is repressed. As Sfas Emes explains that the Bnei Yisrael repressed this fear because there was no way of it being expressed. They could not fight, they could not flee. They went into this freeze mode. But as the Sfas Emes explains, this is the silent panic, the silent voice of fear that the Kadosh Baruch Hu hears, that is most powerful, that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is attuned to hearing and listening. This silent internal fear that is repressed and is held within, that is not expressed. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu hears it, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu fought for the Bnei Yisrael. And this is what the Pasuk is saying. Hashem will fight v'atem tacharishun. Is that even though you're going into this freeze mode, this freeze panic mode, where seemingly there's no escape, and Kadosh Baruch Hu is there to hear this silent voice and to hear and to save the Bnei Yisrael. And as we know, Kadosh Baruch Hu then performed the amazing nes of Kriat Yamsuf. So we can understand through the explanation of the Sfas Emes the stages that the Bnei Yisrael went through, this fight or flight of shouting out, but that turned into a silent freeze mode, which the Kadosh Baruch Hu heard and performed and saved the Bnei Yisrael. So we should understand, and hopefully this should give us hope for the ultimate geula, the ultimate nes that the Kadosh Baruch Hu performed in bringing the Mashiach. And I wish you a good Shabbos and Chag Sameach.